Hi everyone, we're here. This is the last lecture. So this is our review of the course, Introduction to Construction. So in this review, I just want to kind of go over some of the things that we discussed this semester, and that hopefully will tweak some ideas of what to focus on for the final test, but more importantly also just to remember all the things that we've covered and all the things that we've worked on and learned this semester, and how can we retain that in the semesters going forward or in your careers going forward. So there was a lot of things that we managed to cover these past 14 weeks. We kind of started out fairly early with all the things that are known in the construction industry. So if you remember, we kind of looked at all the different sectors, and throughout the course, we talked about different sectors and what they mean. An ICI, institutional, commercial, industrial projects, civil infrastructure, low-rise residential, restoration. We talked about those sectors and what they mean to the construction industry. In one of the earlier lectures, we looked at the stats and how that impacts gross domestic product. And we also looked at what one individual is able or capable of doing. When you do group assignments and that sort of thing, it really involves the inputs of a lot of people. Some of you discovered that, it's not always easy working with other people in groups. And often some people will let you down or let your groups down. You know what? It's kind of like the real world that way when we talk about construction. Very often in construction, there'll be a subcontractor that lets down the general contractor. So general contractors should spend a lot of time ensuring and vetting their people that they work with, both employees and other companies. Some companies are really good. If they can't do something, they let the contractor or general contractor know well in advance. So some of these things in this course, they were done at a very high level. This is not meant to be, a dive deep into one particular topic, but it's a course where you finish this course. Hopefully you've got a kind of an understanding of how this big industry we call construction works and ties together. And you're starting to see that it's a tie between both the soft skills and the technical skills. And the soft skills, as evidenced by your group work and your presentations and things, collaboration is really important as a student. But in the construction industry, it's the same thing. Pulling together people to complete projects, it's challenging, and it requires a lot of expertise, and no one knows everything because of the breadth in the knowledge that's required. So we looked at those types of things. And you can, of course, go back and review any of the videos from the whole course that this stuff seems fuzzy to you now, and you want to clarify and you want to hone up on it for the test. It's very helpful that way. So the stuff from the first 5 lectures or so, 4 lectures, 5 lectures, will be covered more lightly on the test. Maybe we could take Pareto's Law, 20-80 rule, maybe around 20% from the first 4 or 5 lectures, and then the last 5 or 6 lectures, maybe the 80%. So from probably lecture 5, maybe a little bit light on lecture 5, but a little bit more heavy than lecture 4, 3, 2, 1. And the further lectures will be heavier with questions. With that said, and you could probably, it's a pool of questions I've got in the test, so I can't be sure exactly percentage wise where it's going to come, but probably in a zone of 10 to 30% for the first 5 lectures, and then the last 5 or 6 lectures, then you could expect that more would be in that content area. So if you're going to focus most of your time, I'd be focusing on the later part. But you know what? Like I'm doing this lecture now on the review, and I'm bringing in some things from the early part because it comes up over and over again in the other topics. So you don't get a buy necessarily, because the earlier ones kind of looked at, well, what is the construction industry? What is a project? And how do we manage a project? And some of the later lectures that we did, you kind of had to know kind of some of that stuff to be able to better understand the later information. And we kind of, this time, cost, quality triangle, this is going to come up over and over again in your construction careers. This sort of push pull that takes place between these constraints that I also referred to as goals. And we got into a little bit of goals. This is where the connections come in when the later lecture on lean construction came in and we talked about SMART goals. So you can see connections from early parts of the course to later parts of the course, and it's kind of fluid through different things. You know, when you're estimating, when you're doing project management, planning and scheduling, when you're doing site management, these things all come into play. So if that seems a little bit fuzzy, I go back on that earlier lecture. I think it was lecture 2 or 1, 2 probably. We also looked at the project management life cycle. What's involved? And you know, and we've got to first go in pursuit of the project. We've got tendering and bidding that we do to get the project. And if we've got it, we've got to plan it out. And there's what we call pre-construction planning. And then you know what? Nothing goes as planned, right? Eisenhower said that plans are nothing, planning is everything, because we keep replanning things as we go. And so there's this cycle that comes through. And then project closeout. And project closeout could be a separate course all unto itself. How do we close out a project? Well, you close out a project by starting early in the planning process. So this is kind of this flow towards this way. And big part of it was the soft skills mixed in, the communication being the soft skills mixed in with schedule management, schedule development, replanning, which will help lead to control. You can get a good sort of high level view thinking about things in these terms of a project. So this is a pretty good sort of table that gives you a breakdown of this. Going from, you know, why are we doing this project? Why did the client determine that they needed to do it? How do we go from a conceptual plan to construction plans? Does this make sense for us to go ahead with? If it does, then we go into the design and engineering process. Procurement, well, if we actually if it's been bid on and now we get it awarded the project, then we're going to go through that process and then we're going to construct the project. Even though that's one box, it's really a huge box that we talked about in this course. And then, of course, we turn it over and the client makes sure that they're trained for what they need to do to take over the project. And then it gets into, well, now it's theirs and they got to operate it and maintain it, as you'll see in a later slide, because we talked about the life cycle cost. And at some point, highest and best use comes into play, and maybe doesn't fit its best use anymore. You know, this is a condo development going on, and maybe at some point, 75 years from now, this condo will not make sense being in this location, and something will change. Happens. So when we think about construction project management, there's a lot of skills and attributes that managers and leaders need to take care of. And there's a difference between management and leading project. Management is more concerned with the operational processes and making sure that the day-to-day operations is going well. Leadership is having a vision forward. Where are we taking things? And you could kind of compare management to leadership if you want, from the perspective of managers do things right and leaders do the right things. So kind of you can look at it from that perspective, if that helps to clarify the difference between a manager and a leader. But definitely that's part of what the field is that you're in for, and trying to get the skill sets that you need. And it's good, by the way, to have both. I wouldn't want to be just a manager without having forward thinking and a vision for things. You combine both skill sets. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and the better that you combine those skill sets, the more success you'll meet with yourself in the future. Some managers, you know, they're very good on operational processes and that sort of thing, and they can make a good career, to be sure. But if you really take in the leadership aspect and role, then that's where it's a catalyst for large success in your future. You don't have to be some charismatic speaker or something to be a great leader. So we did talk about a number of the different roles in construction, from construction estimators, kind of two tracks in careers in construction. You can go down the estimating track, or you can go down the project management or site track. And even within that, there's the site super sort of management track, and there's the project management track. There's different sort of areas, and one's not good or bad. It's just they're different, and it kind of where are your desires and what do you enjoy? And as you move through different courses in your program, then you'll learn what really sort of you have an affiliation for, or you enjoy, or you're more passionate about. And then I would say that's probably a good track for you in a career. But we definitely defined what an estimator does, what a project manager does, what a site super does, and what the differences are. And so if that needs clarifying, I'd go back and review some of those videos on that. We talked about a lot of the aspect of the construction documents that are used, specifications, the 16 division and 50 division or 0 to 49 division master format for specifications. We also talked about change orders, big part of construction. A lot of things of why we want to have good documentation and be organized is so that we can track our changes, we can look at the impacts changes have on our projects, we can estimate and cost them effectively, because they tend to be an area of dispute when they're not done well, it's not communicated well. Change order is a big part of the construction industry, and a lot of things tied to the construction types. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here on this, but you can definitely review the different contract types. Design, bid, build, which is like a lump sum project contract. Design, build, where you design it and you build it, as opposed to the architect designs it and you bid on it, then you get it, and then you build it. Unit price contracts, integrated project delivery. We talk about that later in the course with lean construction. P3, public-private partnerships, big infrastructure type projects where you're designing it, you're building it, you're financing it, and you're maintaining it, perhaps over a 30-year life cycle. So very complex project contract models, and but very popular with bigger companies as well. You know, Eglinton Crosstown, there would be a good example of a P3 type project. So design, bid, build, most common in design, bid, build, cost plus, another contract type. And we talked about how that affects even the sort of the organizational chart of how the project will be set up and structured. So you can review that in the earlier videos too, with the types of construction projects. We talked about procurement, right? Procurement is like buying out the contracts. You price the project, and now you've been awarded the contract, and now we want to procure. And we've tied that kind of with the supply chain. Well, who are we going to procure it with, right? And contract the work with. So procurement is actually signing these subcontract agreements, and we have to make sure that the scope of work in those agreements is correct, the timeframes that the work is expected to be done in, and the cost matches our budget requirements that we've estimated in the project, or that we've accepted quotes from these particular subcontractors, suppliers, parts of our supply chain in that process. So procurement just means that you're purchasing that particular component of the work. And we're talking about global procurement, all the contracts we have to make and set up for the project. We talked about supply chains, and this has been one heck of a year when we talk about supply chains. Lots of interruptions in supply chains with the COVID-19 having a lot of sort of unexpected issues, and it's what we would call a force majeure event, something that you couldn't control as a contractor, something the client couldn't necessarily control. So we are really heavily dependent on having a healthy supply chain. If there's interruptions in that flow, it can bring our projects literally to a standstill. For example, if there was an interruption in the supply chain of the manufacturing of Portland cement, well, that would mean now you can't get concrete. If you can't get concrete, you can just imagine what that would mean to all of the projects. No different than you can't get toilet paper, you can't get paper towels. It's the same sort of idea that way. So that's why the supply chain aspect is really important in thinking about things. And we also talked about the fabrication process and organization. In lean construction, it's a big area and topic. If we can pre-manufacture things or prefabricate things, it tends to improve our quality on our projects, and it tends to make the time frame for our projects shorter, because you can have things being fabricated off-site, which would shorten the assembly time on-site, make the site less crowded from a site logistics, site organization perspective. And we did talk about some of those elements when we talk about fabrication. You know, when we talk also about the supply chain, we're not buying a drill bit. Really what we're buying is a hole, right? I've heard that said before. You know, when you buy certain things, you're not buying the thing for the thing itself. You're buying it for what it can do for you. And so you should think about your purchases that way. You know, I'm not buying drill bits, I'm buying holes. If I've got something that can make holes twice as fast, then that's a good thing, you know. So then what does it cost? What's my cost per hole related to that thing? It's not that I stand around looking at this marvelous drill bit all day long. I'm really looking at, what do I need to get done? What will this do for me? And will this make it easier to do what I need to do on a construction project? So when we think about supply chains, we look at it from that perspective. The other point that came up a few times in the course was the life cycle. Everybody thinks construction is so expensive. Well, guess what? Ongoing maintenance and operations of facilities even more expensive. And so we have to think about things from a life cycle cost perspective. Now it depends. We talked about contracts. So the other thing at this review, I'm hoping when I talk about all these different things, you start to see how all these different points, they start to connect, and you know, the neural networks are starting to go off in your brain, that you're seeing, oh wow, I didn't realize that connects with this connects with that. And in further learning, you're going to see them really start to connect and fire off your neurons. So when we think about construction costs, we have these upfront costs that we incur and when we're building, and then we have all of these later on costs that occur. And you know what? Even in the design stage, the very early stages, it can have huge impacts on later costs. And the contract type has a big impact on it. So, you know, if I'm doing a design bid build and it's for a client and it's a condominium building, and I'm the designer, then I'm really trying to design this building that fits their budget, that's going to give them the highest return on the investment for the developer. And it's a little bit different, because then I'm designing it and I know that they're going to sell it, and these are going to be condo unit owners, and then they're going to move in, and I've got a warranty program, the carry-on warranty program that covers up to 7 years, major structural, and other points much shorter. So I've just got to make sure that this building fits into that warranty program, lasts at least that long, meets all the building code requirements. But 15, 20 years from now, if the curtain wall's failing or things like that, it's not my problem. If I do a P3 project like the Eglinton Crossdown, and I have to maintain this project for 25, 30 years, I got to think about it differently, because 15 years from now, there's going to be costs in that maintenance. So I better be designing this to have a maximum life cycle, or shorter, that when I do have to repair things, it's not as complex or difficult to do. It's a little bit more straightforward. So it's a little bit different way of thinking about things when you think about something over its life cycle, as opposed to a very short flip to sell something. So there's lots of stuff we do short to flip to sell things, and then there's lots of things that the client owns it and they operate it. Building at George Brown College, we would want to think about that over a longer term, because the likelihood is we're going to keep this building for 20, 25 years or more. At some point, it probably won't be of use either. You know, when I started at George Brown, there was buildings there that were down at Kensington Market. We had a campus. There was one down by the Eaton Center. and we sold them off to build and move into other campuses because they no longer fit their best purpose. Even at the Casa Loma campus, there were buildings there that are no longer there. They were torn down. New building was built. So that's tying into that life cycle aspect. We definitely dove into what an estimator does, what the role of estimating is, what the role of the bid process. We talked a little bit about the different bonds that are used, a payment bond, a bid bond, a performance bond. And this, of course, also once you get the project leads to cost control. This is another course that you do later in the program, usually, in your final year, because now it's kind of a capstone course where you're looking at, well, we're doing the project, now we're monitoring it. Now, where can we ensure that we're controlling our costs? How are we ensuring that we're staying on budget? What are the things that we can do to improve and do things more efficiently at this stage, right? So we do a lot of stuff in the pre-construction that we want to try to ensure that things are going to go well later on, but we have to have processes and systems and mechanisms in place so we can control our costs during the construction project. And one of the things we don't want to do is have to do things twice, right? So when you have to do things twice, that has a huge impact on your budget, and it's a good way to lose money. So waste is a big deal. That's why later in the course we looked at lean construction, and for sure there's going to be a few questions on lean construction on that aspect because it ties to so many different things, right? The 8 areas of waste. I've got it coming up on a slide. So the startup process, there was a lecture, and this is where we're starting to get into where you're going to be more on the 80% side of the course. The startup, the pre-construction planning, developing a schedule, developing a work breakdown structure. These are called summary tasks in here. How you've got a master schedule, you've got short-term schedules, and how that ties to perhaps equipment that you need to closely monitor so that you've got things and you're prioritizing activities based on a critical path, the longest path through a project. So sort of that updating process. We got to know where we are so we can figure out where we need to go. And we got to have a plan. And the plan is the baseline that we come up with, and then we make adjustments. No project hits the ground the way we planned it. We have to make adjustments, and that's just the way it is. I mentioned change orders already, but that is one of the documents that you should look at. You should know the difference between quality assurance and quality control. So you should know the difference between quality assurance and quality control. You could kind of draw circles, and quality assurance is the bigger circle, and quality control fits within the quality assurance circle. Quality control is actually testing and checking on the work. Quality assurance is trying to set up a system where the work is going to be acceptable. It's going to meet the requirements for the project, the scope of work requirements. And within that, we have to test that we're actually doing what we thought. And then that provides feedback into the quality assurance program so that we can continuously improve. So you'll see PDCA in one of your lectures, plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, act. Very instrumental in quality control programs, also very instrumental process in lean construction methodology. Substantial completion, very important word in construction. It means that you can use the building for its intended purpose. It's sufficiently complete. If I'm building a movie theater, I can show the new James Bond, well, maybe not right now. I can show the new James Bond movie in this movie theater, right? So substantial completion is referring to those aspects. I can use it for its intended purpose. So I should be able to get occupancy, another key word. That's from the permit process. That means it can be used safely, and that would be the building department giving you occupancy. And substantial completion means it could be used for its intended purpose. You could have occupancy, but it's not completed enough for you to use it for its intended purpose. So maybe you can get occupancy, the classrooms, the railings, the building is safe, but you didn't get the bolt-in desks and chairs in yet, well, they can't really run it as classrooms. So if I'm facilities, I'm going to be giving the contractor a hard time saying I don't have substantial completion. We talked about regulatory objectives, and we kind of looked at things from, and in several different angles, from the planning process, the zoning process, and the building code process, and some of the nuanced differences between them. So like a minor variance going in here, and look, the project is already this deep. This is the date, and they're actually going for a variance while they're actually excavating. And this variance is they want to increase the number of stories, right? So they want to make this building taller, and they've already started construction. Now they would have designed the foundation such that it can support those extra stories. They're thinking they're going to get these extra stories, so they're going ahead, and that's one way that they're trying to compress and save time, right? Rather than wait till they get that approved before they start excavating, they didn't want to do that because it takes time. May even have to go to the Ontario Municipal Board. So yeah, we also talked about regulations of all types. So we looked at the safety aspect and the safety regulatory authority. So we talked about the Ministry of Labor. They're really the police, if you want, not really police, but basically the enforcement arm of construction safety regulations. We also talked about WSIB, Workers' Safety and Insurance Board, and they're really to protect workers for pay, compensation, if they become injured on the job. They collect premiums from the employers and all of those aspects. And then you had IHSA, which is Infrastructure Health and Safety Association, which is really sort of the preventative side of things. So they conduct a lot of training and different programs to try to ensure that accidents don't happen on projects. And it's a tough sector, right? Construction that way. We talked about waste in the construction industry, and so if I was to ask you about that, my questions would usually be in the zone of 30 to 40% waste, lots of waste. If you really look at from lean construction, they actually add these two together because we could always make savings in this particular area as well, and that would be a positive thing. These things we kind of need to ensure that they go in. But in this particular area, you could think about it from the perspective of if I can schedule things faster, if I can set things up faster, then that's going to be a big bonus from that perspective. So if I was to ask a question in this area, I would have my answer somewhere in the 30 to 40% range for that, because that's a very typical type. You look at the research on that, that's where that comes from. And these are the 8 areas of waste, and I think this is a really good sort of starting point in this particular area. Defects, weighting, transportation of goods, motion, inventory, overproduction, unnecessary process steps, incorrect use of talent or underutilized talent. And so definitely construction has all of these going on, if not at once, at certain points in time. And so again, review, there's that whole lecture that I did on lean construction. So I would definitely take some time and go through that. That's definitely in the last part of the course. So that's definitely going to have a lot of emphasis in this way. And ethics, we talked about ethics. And so I've just got this one slide, but definitely that's another one where it's important going forward in your career. Construction industry, like a lot of industries, unfortunately, has a lot of unethical practices. So it's important that you understand what is considered ethical, what's not considered ethical, what's considered ethical and what's considered unethical. And I also kind of put some language in there and some quotes from key people that I could easily call upon in a test situation that I think helps to recognize or puts things into perspective of whether you think, if you're having trouble understanding whether it's ethical or not, better understanding it. I guess the one quote that would come to mind would be, if your name was and face was in the front page of your local newspaper and all your family and friends were going to read it, would you still want to do this? Right? So if it's no, then don't do it. It's a very clear way of answering your question. If it's like, sometimes people will rationalize and justify things inappropriately. It's a good way of sort of framing it to make you think about it better. We did look at the different associations, and just by the uptake that I saw and the amount of people viewing this, there was a lot of uptake. So that's really heartening to see, because it means you're really interested in your futures and your careers and the opportunities that are set forth in that. So there's a lot of different certifications that are available to you, and I kind of put them into the various perspectives. Do I think I covered them all? No, there's even other ones that were not covered. Did I cover every association? No, there's even more specialized associations in there. I kind of talked about, I spent a lot of time on the Toronto Construction Association, the Canadian Construction Association, Ontario General Contractors Association, more the ICI sectors. And then I also talked about the home building sectors with Building Industry and Land Development Association, Ontario Home Builders Association, Canadian Home Builders Association. Talked about the different levels that they lobby at. But other ones, like a lot of our students get jobs with mechanical contractors. Well, there's a Mechanical Contractors Association, and there's a variety of different associations. There's even I talked about it in the other course, National Kitchen and Bath Association. So there's lots of different areas that are connected. But I do think we covered off the main high-level ones. So that was covered in there. So it'd be definitely anything I would ask would be from that section. I would have enough understanding that I could look things up if I needed to during the test. With the different certifications that are also available. And we talked about Lean, we talked about PMP, we talked about PQS. So there was quite a CIOB, Chartered Institute of Builders, Gold Seal, they all come rushing out, LEED, AP. So just keep in mind that you've got an understanding of that, and if there's something that you're fuzzy on, you can go through that particular video lecture, and that should help you. If you want to have a quick sort of recall during a test too, this is a good way to remember the 8 areas of waste. Should have had that in the earlier slide, but that's okay. Towards the end too, in Lean, I talked about goals. Well, goals is this sort of format for goals. I had on the other slide, which was SMART goals. So there's another slide in that video lecture. I should have pulled that in here. SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. And you want to make sure that you've got commitment, which will lead to self-efficacy or confidence that you can do the goals. Goals tie to everything in construction. Going back to that earlier lecture, time, cost, quality, they're called constraints. You can flip them around. They're goals. Can we fit in this time frame? Can we fit within this budget? Can we meet this quality expectation? And goals give us the parameters of where we're going to be motivated and driving towards. And then that allows us to reverse engineer the best processes, systems, habits, rituals, routines for us to be able to establish to get there in an effective way and be able to repeat that process over time. So you can bet that that's an important aspect of the construction industry, and really understanding that going forward in your careers and how these things fit together will help to lead to future success. Also mentioned the last planner system, and I think it was in lecture 11, with the different levels of scheduling. Traditional scheduling, you got like master schedules, you've got like a 6-week and a weekly schedule. Last planner, you kind of have extra layers, and you have a lot more engagement between the people that are involved in the work. And that ties to the goals and reliable promising. And last planner, you're kind of going from, we may be able to hit these timeframes to, we should be able to hit these timeframes to, we will be able to hit these timeframes. And so that's really sort of narrowing it down as you get closer to the work. You've got it laid out, and everybody's much better prepared and confident about actually executing. Problem is, in traditional construction methods, we all too often don't hit our promises. And so that's why that aspect of reliable promising comes up in that lecture. And so I thought I'd finish off with just the last few slides that where we started. So finish where you start. Different way of looking at it, but back to the beginning. And so you've had a semester, and we kind of in this semester looked at quite a few things, including change. And I think we can all agree this year has been a year of change. It's been a year of change for me, and I'm quite sure it's been a year of change for you doing your courses online. And I think that to be resilient, we have to look at change in a very sort of positive and proactive way. Because as we discussed earlier on, and this is from the book Thank You for Being Late by Thomas Friedman. This was from an interview he did with Astro Teller, who at the time was head of Google, in charge of the self-driving vehicles, their effort in that endeavor. And so one of the things that sort of came up was this aspect of how quickly things are changing, and they're changing at a rate. So there's human adaptability where we have to be able to adapt more quickly. And that really means that we've got to get better at learning, and we've got to get better at adapting. And, I think there was an old Star Trek with the Borg, and the Borg was like to Worf, you too will be assimilated. And he said, never, right? We have to kind of, not that he should want to get assimilated, but we have to be kind of resilient in the fact that we do need to change, and we do need to have a little bit of a open mind. And so that aspect, I think where I was trying to get with that Star Trek quote was resistance is futile, right? And so no, we're going to resist, we're going to change, we're going to adjust, we're going to move towards something different. And so learning faster and governing smarter comes into that. And we did talk about how distracted we get, and you guys can reflect on your semester. Most of you had your cameras off. There was a few of you that tended to always have your cameras on. I would suspect that probably at least half of you, when your cameras are off, you're probably trying to do three other things at the same time as listen to a lecture. You know what? In live classrooms, it wasn't that much different too. The only difference was I could see people that weren't really paying attention. And I'm not saying that I'm any better sometimes, when there's a faculty meeting, if the cameras are off, I probably am doing something, and so are probably most of the other faculty that way. So we're all human that way. But if we do need to learn something more effectively and in less time, because now you're feeling the crunch and you're like, I don't remember this, I don't remember that. Did he say this? I don't remember that. And now you've got all this stuff piling up. It would have been a lot better if you had been able to focus at the time. It would be easier to recall that information. It would be more sticky. It's not very sticky when you're getting it from all ends and you got information overload. So that's something I would look at in your habits and see if there's a way that you can improve your ability to focus on things. And so these learning tips that I did earlier on, I think it's not bad for you to reflect at this point. How well did the semester go for you? And where did you struggle? And what can you change in this last couple of weeks? But also, more importantly, build in habits, rituals, and routines in the next semester. And it's an ongoing process. And be looking at that. As I probably quoted before, Einstein said to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. That's the definition of insanity. Well, think about your own processes. We did talk about lean and the continuous improvement aspect. How can I continuously improve in the area of learning? Because you know what? It seems like I'm going to have to do this for the rest of my life, so I might as well get good at it. And then you know what? The world's your oyster, because when things change, you'll be the easiest and most adaptable. And it wasn't Darwin that said survival of the fittest. It's really the most survival of the most adaptable. And what are we going through? We're going through change. So keep that in mind. So these learning tips can be helpful for you. I'm not going to go through them one by one. If you do want to get a more deep sense, you can go back to the earlier lecture on that and really sort of get, it's on the first lecture, the first 15, 20 minutes on that. But I would definitely, if I were you, think about that and looking at how that can be of assistance to you. Because taking information, looking at it, just even if you only did it the one lecture that week and then you forgot about it 6 weeks later, you don't retain it. But if you go back and you check different things out, even if it's very quickly, it keeps that in your brain and it keeps it fresh, and then you don't lose it. And the more times that you look at it, the more sticky it gets and the harder and longer it takes for you to lose it, so that then when you go into the next semester and there's stuff that's building on these topics that we talked about, it's not such a drop that you got to go back up and spend so much time. So if you're looking at saving time, it's an investment now that saves you time later, but it also saves you stress. So these are some pretty good books, and as I mentioned before, there's lots of good YouTube videos if books isn't your thing, or there's lots of good reviews that you can get on these things too, that you can get a sense of things. I would definitely look at this. If you've got time over the holidays, you might want to do the Coursera course online. It's, that is basically the Learn to Learn course that Barbara runs, and you can take it for free. So it's teaching you how to be more effective at learning fast. If I could take it, you could take it, right? So these are just some background ones, but if you're looking for really sort of really good, sort of solid ones like this, is really helpful. And she's got some really good YouTube videos as well. So we started off, are we resistant to change? Why might somebody be resistant to change, and why we're nervous, and we should be embracing it and not be resistant to it. I hope I've kind of set sort of a benchmark on that myself, because you know what? I've been teaching in a classroom for 30 plus years, and so this is a change. But when I have something I have learned over the years, that when things shift, I'm ready to shift with it. So for me, it's a lot of effort, but is it stressing me out? No, it's not stressing me out. I'm just figuring it out, and I'm enjoying the process. That's the other thing with all the learning, and I'm hoping this course in construction, you see the complexity, you see the breadth of it, you see the interactions and the problem solving that goes on in it. It's a great industry to be in. But it's not, I'll be honest, it's not a great industry to be in right now or the next 30 years if you don't like things that change and you're not wanting to adapt. So build those skills, and if you learn nothing else but learn to learn and how to adapt in this course, then you're going to figure it out going forward. So I wish everybody the best, and if you made it all the way to the end of this video lecture, then that tells me you're a serious student, so good for you. And you'll be ready for the test. So this is Tom Stephenson signing off, and wishing you the best in your future. Bye for now.